Senator Gaddy with Senate Bill 512. Senator Gaddy.
Wow.
Senator Gaddy, thank you and the
I'm
group
glad,
from Shreveport who drove a long ways. They got up early this morning and watched those cheese sandwiches because this
No
group might get
kidding.
into them.
I'd like to enter to the
Wait, Bishop is eating.
man.
Senator
He-
Bishop, you just got moved back in the lineup.
He found that bag with cheese sandwiches in it. That's what he did.
It's Bossier.
I'm sorry, not Shreveport. I've been corrected. Bossier.
That's right. Bossier and Webster.
Senator Gaddy.
Thank you so much, Senator Morse. Senator Morse. I am so hangry right now. That's hungry and angry. That's what we call it back home. That's a redneck term of endearment. It's a big deal in our area right now, this bill. I know I've talked to most of y'all about this ahead of time, and I'm going to be short in my responses. There's very few of these students who will just come forward and share their heart with you. Senate Bill 512 deals with an issue that's been going on for quite some time, and it deals with the prayer in school issue. These children behind me were praying so much at their school that they were recognized in a federal lawsuit. And that's really not the kind of citation you want to get, but it is what happened.
Yes, it is.
It
is.
And my mom told me growing up, if you get in trouble, it better be for something good. And I never could find anything they got in trouble for that was any good, but these kids seem to have found something. So we all know that student-led prayer is completely okay. Students can initiate prayer. We have a whole section of law on student-led prayer. But there's a huge chilling effect in a situation where all the parents are okay with the teacher praying with their child, checking on their child, whether their child's being bullied, whether their child's having some issues at home, going through a family situation or a death. But once under these lawsuits, the school boards and the coaches and the teachers, they really just feel like they're under a gag order. So what this bill basically does, and the students will tell you more about it, is it gives a pathway to make sure you're not stepping on anyone's toes. It's a 100% agreement or zero privileges. And we want to make sure that no one is offended by prayer, that no one feels like they're being indoctrinated, no one feels like they're being pressured. And so this bill basically in Part 2, B1, just simply says if a parent signs a permissions, that would be proper. I'm sorry, I'm so hungry right now.
And let's see, what is the amendment number, Ms. Johnson? 2913 being passed out now.
And so 2913 puts the bill in the proper posture because after visiting with staff for quite some time and yesterday really specifically, the issue kind of came to a head after some things that happened back home. And so I will just briefly say that this amendment allows a process to happen whereby a parent can sign a permission slip for a specific teacher or any teacher to check on their child, and if it calls for prayer, they can do that. Right now, that is not the case. There is no avenue or venue in any way that, even if all the teachers go to the same school, all the students go to the same, if everybody goes to the same church in the little rural school, there is a gag order on them not to talk about these things. So,
My goodness. Thank you, Senator Gaddy. Senator Appel, did you have a question on the amendment? Okay. Is there any discussion on the amendment among the members? Senator Boudreaux, you have a question on the amendment?
Say again, it sets up a process.
well, what it basically says is the parent or legal guardian or legal guardian of each child, each student in attendance at the gathering, or whom the employee prays, has submitted a signed request that the employee may participate in the gathering or pray with this child. That's important because the courts always look at, well, they assume that there's got to be one kid that didn't want it.
Is this like a permission slip? I mean, we're signing a permission slip to allow our kids. Okay, so that is the process that you've incorporated into it. Okay, I'm clear.
Thank you, Senator Boudreaux. Is there any questions on the amendment? Are there any objections to Amendment 2913 to Senate Bill 512? Hearing no objection, Amendment 2913 to SB 512 is adopted.
Thank you. We have some speakers that would like to speak, and then I'll answer any questions at the end.
And Senator Appel has a question for the author.
Yes, sir.
You and I were discussing this yesterday, and as you know, or not, this committee's heard this type of legislation for at least 10 years that I've been here. And it's always been the case that prayer was allowed in a school as long as it wasn't part of the classroom function. So, first of all, does this bill allow prayer as a classroom function? In other words, in the classroom with the teacher?
Well, I think that when you look back, yeah, and I think it may, but it would only happen if everyone in the classroom had turned in this permission slip.
So,
So if you have
as I
15
appreciate the way it's structured now, you can have prayer in a school as long as it's like
Good.
across the hall in a separate room, but not in the classroom. I mean, is that a fair characterization in your mind?
Yeah, yeah, you can have student-led prayer in clubs, groups, FCA, first
So
priority. Those
why
kind
do
of
we,
things.
I mean, it's always been the case when these have come before us, that there's been litigation, very expensive litigation, resulting from
There has been.
that aspect of having it with the teacher in a classroom.
Well, and I think,
So-
and all those cases have something in common. The teacher prays, and a parent gets mad about it. Okay? In this situation, the parents, starting with a student-initiated request, would ask the employee of the school to pray with them. That's a whole different factual scenario. And these cases, when they percolate up to the Supreme Court, they are fact-intensive. So, in looking at this, and children will talk about it, you could have a classroom of 20 kids, and they all want to be able to talk with the teacher about these issues or have it bring it up in class, and the teacher will say, we can't talk about this in here.
But why can't we, why is it necessary to go to that step when you could do exactly what you want to do with the way the law is structured now, and it has already been sustained by the courts?
Well, because whenever a school or school board gets sued and they become under the ruling of a federal judge, they have to pass guidelines, which will be talked about later, that say teacher can't bow their head, teacher cannot walk in the room, teacher cannot initiate anything, and these teachers are under a consent order. And so,
And you don't believe that this is going to generate such litigation and create a consent order anyway?
once again, from a broad overview of all the cases on the Establishment Clause and the First Amendment, parents get very upset when someone tries to interfere with their religious rights
understand.
to their
I understand.
child. But we also get upset as parents when everyone in the class it wants to talk about these issues, and the teacher says, I cannot talk about it with you because I don't really have permission to do that. Well, the parents hold the right. And so we're in a situation now where this right has been eroded away, and the only way for a coach or a teacher to pray with students during this time, we feel like, is if there is a request from the parent, and the request has to be unanimous.
So I'm from Jefferson Parish. This doesn't affect just your little school or
That's
your
correct.
little district. It
That's correct.
affects the entire state of Louisiana. I've got a lot of Muslims. I got a lot of Jewish people. I got a lot of Catholics, atheists, the whole world. Y'all may not have that where you are.
We do.
I do. And so when you do this, suddenly this may create a lot of conflict amongst students and teachers.
Well, actually, it decreases.
But you're asking them to sign off a release.
Well, no, it
so then you got
decreases- it decreases the conflict.
Teacher-student pressures and.
It actually, we think it'll have the opposite effect. It will decrease the conflict because that teacher knows that if a student encourages teacher prayer, that she'll say, no, I can't do that because we really literally don't have permission to do that. And
Who
so
initiates this process? In other words,
students do.
So if I have a class, I'm being hypothetical, you know that.
I understand.
If I got a class of 20 kids and a third of them are Christian, a third are not Christian, a third you don't know, and that Christian third initiates this process, you don't feel like this creates an avenue for pressure back at home, in the classroom? I mean, I don't have a problem if that third goes across the hall and does
No,
whatever
I
they want to
think
do, which they
this-
can do today.
I don't think I don't think that's the vehicle where the situation where this will be used at all. I think you'll have it used in plain dealing rural areas where they've been saying the blessing for 50 years, and everyone in the classroom is
Yeah,
okay
but this
with it?
applies to everybody, in
does.
every school, in every district in the whole state. I got
Well,
all-
I'll give you an example.
I'm not the same,
well,
my people are not the same as your people, unfortunately,
I
unfortunately.
understand.
Oh, I'm absolutely, we're heathens down there, I'll tell you.
And I'll just say this: this permission slip process is a lot cleaner than the old way that it's been handled, where it's just lawsuits like whack-a-mole. Someone prays, they get sued. Someone else prays, they get sued. The teacher, the coach knows ahead of time, I may want to do this, but I can't. I don't have permission to do it. This is a paradigm shift because typically the state actor is pushing prayer on people. Like the very first case, that's what happened with student Shemp in 1956. That's where this all started. It was a memorized prayer being said over the loudspeaker. He objected. This is different. This is students wanting it. And the students want this. The teachers want to do it. And in fact, the teachers were named in
But
lawsuits.
if the students want it, why can't they just go across the hall and do it like they do now? I mean, I listen, I went to public school a long time ago. Nobody prayed. We didn't pray because there was a diverse group of people in these classes, and they have different religious views. And
Well, I think that's the issue. If you have a diverse group, this probably would not have any effect at all on your school system. But if you have a typically homogeneous group of the same, like if you're down Lake Charles and everybody's Catholic, this would apply. If you're down in,
yeah, but everybody won't be Catholic. You're going to have different.
No, but actually-
You know where I'm coming from.
I know.
I'm not against what
Well,
you're
we'll
trying to
take-
do, but I have a problem because of the nature of the composition of districts that are outside of your area. That's all.
right.
So-
Well, the waiver is not, the permission slip is not religion specific. It is
I understand
for
that,
any
but
religion. It doesn't promote.
In
or
my
promise-
world, everybody's mixed together. We're not all homogeneous, so it's a different
understand.
thing. So anyway, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Pell. Senator Walsworth, you had a question?
Just real quickly, and I know these young people have got to get on a bus and go back home, but I'd like to go on that bus with you, please. But two things. One, right, I want to make sure that with the amendment, that if there's one that doesn't sign, that he's taken out of the classroom, to make sure that everybody in the classroom then has it. You see what I'm saying? Because you continue to say it's either all or nothing, but I don't necessarily see that it doesn't disallow that you can remove that one. I don't think that's what you're trying to do. I think you've continued to tell me that it's either, if everybody wants it, that's fine, but if one doesn't want it, there's not going to be prayer in this. But I don't necessarily see in your amendment that I feel the confidence that it gives that one the right to say, no, we're not going to do that.
Well, under Part 1, and we did try to find that wording, it says the parent or legal guardian of each student in attendance. And what the scenarios we talked about hundreds of scenarios to come up with this wording. That scenario means if it's 15 kids in a second grade class and only 14 kids have turned in this permission slip, then the teacher cannot do it.
Okay.
That's clear, and the teacher does not get to exclude that.
And you think
person.
that's clear enough that in your, you see what I'm saying? It doesn't necessarily
I
say
think
that
it can be cleared
I
up.
I can remove the one kid and now I've got everybody in attendance that has signed the permission slip. That's the only thing I don't think, you've told me that's not what your intent is to remove the one kid who doesn't sign, but it is the one kid who doesn't sign that can keep the rest of them from praying.
Well, that's actually what the courts are concerned
And that's what the
about.
court is
The
saying,
courts
but-
are very concerned
Yeah.
that there's a person in that class that is sickened by prayer.
Right.
And they assume that in every classroom, that their rights are being trampled on, their rights to, especially the right between the parent and the child to foster that religious relationship with whatever God they worship, and they don't want a third-party teacher impressing rights. So the reason this concept might possibly change the factual scenario is because the parent signs
Has
the
signed
permission
off.
for the child and says, "I'm okay with Coach Walsworth
Yeah.
doing this." And it's just like you sign a permission slip for the child to be spanked or to get aspirin. You know, those are parental rights, those are big deals, and we allow those rights to be signed off on other people.
Second of all, I think our problem is we've tried to take prayer out of school, and that's probably where some of our problems in the school systems are now. And so I'm telling you, there is nothing wrong with our kids praying. So,
Thank you.
and I'm glad that there's coaches out there that want to pray. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Walsworth. Senator Milkovich for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Gaddy, thank you for bringing this bill. If I understand correctly, this bill respects and recognizes parent and student-initiated prayer rather than from school officials. Is that correct?
That's correct.
This bill is not about forcing people to pray or express their faith. This is about giving people that happen to be in a school setting freedom to express their faith. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And as I understand your bill, you have worked very carefully to avoid offense to objectors. Is that also true?
That's correct.
And I think you may agree with Senator Walsworth and I that too much prayer, too much faith, that's one problem we do not have currently in schools. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
And would you agree that prayer and faith is something that can build the moral fiber of our children, instill lifelong lessons and disciplines and values in the students, and make our schools safer?
I think those are all true.
Thank you, Senator Gaddy, and thank you for bringing this bill.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mizell.
Just a brief comment. I think you and I had talked about this, and the irony that a good friend of mine is a chaplain at the prison, and he is able to go in freely and pray with what is a terrifically diverse group of people who need the option. So I support what you're doing. I just thank you for doing it. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mizell.
Thank you, Senator Mizell. We do have cards who would like to speak in support. Mackenzie, is it Swilly? Mackenzie Swilly, if you'll come to the table, Mackenzie. Catherine Gaddy?
Whoa.
Oh, no, it's an inside job.
Katie Walker. And we have more, but we'll. Miss Swilly.
All right, so as many of you know, Webster Parish has had a lawsuit.
Miss Swilly, if you'll pull the mic closer to you. Some of us are old, bald-headed, and deaf.
Okay, I get it. Okay, so as many of you know, Webster Parish, that's where I'm from, has had a lawsuit filed against them in response to religious activity in school. And throughout this process, we realized that we need to stand up and utilize our freedom of expression. So, like, throughout this whole process, the students have had to take action, because we can't let our rights get taken away from us so easily. And throughout Lakeside, we have organized events like Prayer at the Pole, where it's before school, it's at 7:45 in the morning, and it's actually inviting parents, community members, and teachers. So that's a good thing. And we realized that what we were lacking was our rights, and that's where Protect Prayer, which Catherine will touch on later, comes into place. And Protect Prayer pretty much educates students and equips them to use their rights throughout their schools. And this helps our students get more involved throughout their schools and teaches them how to live out their faith in a legal way. And that's what's most important throughout this process, is that our students know the legal way to do it. That way we don't have to have this kind of problem that we're facing today. And yesterday, our school board Monday, our school board held like a meeting, and they created this new policy. And in this policy, I'm quoting it right here, it says, school officials shall not offer a prayer, recite a prayer alongside or with students, bow their heads, kneel, join hands, or otherwise posture in a manner that is likely to be perceived as an endorsement of the prayer. This is a new policy that Webster Parish School Board is trying to set in stone for next school year. And there was only one person that actually had the faith to stand up and oppose it. And in my opinion, nothing bad can come from these waivers or this amendment. This amendment will solve any issue that this policy has brought upon us, and I feel like it is the, I don't know the word for it. This will pretty much be our saving grace for our school. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Swilly. Miss Gaddy. Do you know anyone in this room?
Just a few. Well, I do want to start off by saying, well, although my last name is Gaddy, this is wholeheartedly where my passion is and where my core is my faith. And although it happens to be the same as my dad, this is completely and totally something that has been student-initiated and student-led. And Protect Prayer came about when the lawsuits were filed against Bossier and Webster Parish because of the religious activities in our schools. And so this has been something that students have come out just to support students living out their faith in their schools. And so our job that we have taken upon ourselves as a nonprofit organization is to educate students on the legal rights that we already have, and then to equip them with ways to use these rights, like the waivers, and also encourage them just as a body of believers, because we come together in these rallies where we have hundreds of students from different schools and churches and denominations and districts and all of these different things that would separate us normally, and we all come together as the body of Christ. And although all students are not there, and that is not every single student, it is a large majority of students from many different schools, and I see this just as an opportunity for these students to be able to live out their faith in a legal way, and just encouraging them. And these waivers are just a large encouragement. And really, the passage in the Bible that Protect Prayer was founded on is Ephesians chapter 6. It's called the Armor of God, and it starts off saying, "Finally be strong in the Lord and the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil." Because we know that we're not angry at the people who filed these lawsuits. We don't want to be hateful towards them. We don't want to attack them. We just want to show the love of Jesus to them through our actions, and we do that through putting on the full armor of God. And at the end of this passage, it talks about binding everything together in prayer, which is why prayer is what we are working to protect. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Ms. Gaddy. Ms. Walker?
Thank you all so much for letting us come. I just wanted to kind of reiterate, like, we are forced that Protect Prayer is for students and we're by students, that with our rallies and student testimonies, we've seen over 100 students get behind us. We've had hundreds join us in our rallies and things like that. It's just so encouraging to see that your peers and your students, they're taking action and they're excited about Jesus and to share the love of God with their friends on campus. These prayer waivers, though, they would help us and kind of assist us in the process of sharing our faith on campus. This way we would know beforehand who wants to participate and who doesn't. And that way we won't offend them in any way. And because, like Catherine said, we don't want to make them angry or anything like that. We want to show them love. And the one thing that we want to do is just be able to fully live out our faith on campus, and having our teachers and staff members behind us and our friends and peers would be great. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Walker. And we do have others who wish to speak in support. Katie Boland and Jacob Ryan. While Katie and Jacob are making their way to the table, I have other cards in support who do not wish to speak. Brandy Melissa, George Allen, Allison Smith, Abigail Lucas, Patricia Bouillon, Tate Towns, Olivia Turner, Jeb Spiney, Sarah Elizabeth Gaddy, Jordan Pruitt, Gavin Fleck, Gavin, help me, Gavin. Flakin, got it. Ronald Rhymes, Vicky Rhymes, Jason Rhymes, Taylor Culpepper, Rayleigh Prince, Courtney Bouillon, Corrigan Wiggins, Gracelyn Brewster, Ellen White, Susan Gaddy, Christy Cross, Logan Bailey, and Carolyn Rhymes, all in support who do not wish to speak. Giving you. Ladies first.
All right. Hello, committee. My name is Katie Bolin, and I'm a junior at Benton High School. I wanted to first thank you so much for your time. This is something that so many students at school are so incredibly passionate about, and I feel that it is an incredible honor to be with you today. So thank you so much for your careful attention. I wanted to share one of my favorite Bible verses that I believe Protect Prayer just embodies. And it's 1 Timothy 4:12, which says, "Let no one look down on your youthfulness, but rather in speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity, show yourself an example of those who believe." This is what Protect Prayer is about, and many other in-school, student-led religious organizations. Protect Prayer exists to facilitate the opportunity for students to learn about Christ, to love Christ more, and to learn how to be leaders in their faith, because that's what true leaders are. They are faithful and humble servants of God. That is a true leader. We serve to encourage our students to set an example for the younger ones. What sets us apart is that this organization, Protect Prayer, is for all students, meaning kindergarten through 12th graders. So this gives our little ones the opportunity to learn what it looks like to be a servant leader. And we also understand that we are here today not just to defend and to stand up for our rights as students, but also those who are not yet going through the school system yet and who are so young that they don't quite have their voice just yet. We are preparing to take the baton from the generation ahead of us. And what this organization does is equip us, students equipping students through God's word, not on our behalves, but us encouraging each other that this world can be hard and it can be dark, but that if we unite together and we're different for Jesus together, that encourages us to strengthen our baton to pass it on to the generation that's coming behind us. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ron.
I just want to thank you guys for allowing us to come here and have this great opportunity. There's not many high schoolers that say that they have gotten to testify in front of the Senate on something that they really are passionate about. And I realized two things as I was sitting here. Being the last one to speak, you realize that everyone's already taken just about everything you were going to say. And also that while Senator Gaddy was up here speaking, I'm pretty sure he copied my notes that I had written down, because he hit just about every bullet point that I had prepared for.
That's the way he is. Yeah, he does that.
But I mean, this is such an important thing that I do not feel that people will be tired to hear it repeated over again. So I'm going to do just that. The theory behind this whole thing is that constitutional rights can be waived. When one person gets arrested, they have the right to remain silent, and then that right can be waived. And so the theory is that it's the same thing with these prayer waivers. It's the parent's right that their child's teacher cannot engage in religious expression, such as praying with the student. And so, say that I were Katie's teacher and her mom and dad signed this waiver, and I'm going to read the top section of the waiver if you haven't seen it for you. It says, "I," and then there's a blank, so Mr. or Mrs. Bolin, "the parent or guardian of the student named below, agree to allow my child the opportunity to have access to prayer with a teacher whom he or she trusts, and do hereby give permission to the listed teachers and or faculty members to pray with my child in the event he or she has requested prayer. Undersigned does hereby waive any right that would prevent undersigned teachers from praying with my child." So what this waiver is basically doing is, it's the parents. They have a choice. We're not forcing anything on them. So that we're avoiding that there, so people can't say that this is something that prayer is being forced upon them. This form is acknowledging that, and it was discussed about other religions. I've had several questions about this going into it. They're like, what if a Buddhist would like to come up and pray, or things like say I have a Buddhist teacher, and as a Christian family, I don't know that my parents would be necessarily comfortable with a Buddhist teacher praying with me, just because we do not necessarily share the same beliefs. So the bottom section of it is specific teachers. So teachers that your parents know that share the same faith with you, they can engage in that prayer. So it's not necessarily all teachers, which, yeah, I don't know, I lost my words. But so the prayer waiver seeks to waive that right. I know that this has been discussed already. The hypothetical of a class of 14 children. In that class, they say a prayer before they go to lunch every day, and then once the lawsuit was filed, they had to quit doing so. And then, so the theory is, if all 14 students in this class have their parent waive their right, then the prayer before lunch can continue. And if only 13 sign it, then obviously the class cannot continue praying. But this goes far beyond the classroom. I know a lot of people think that this is just teachers engaging in prayer with students, but it goes as far as with like a teacher in an FCA club being able to participate in prayer with them, a football coach before a game. There are all kinds of clubs on campus, different sports organizations that these students are wanting to engage in prayer with these teachers, faculty members, or coaches, because let's be honest, these are the people that we spend much of our time with growing up. I mean, we're at school with these people for 7 hours a day. I personally have so much respect for all of my teachers, and I mean, they're some of the greatest people, and I look up to them. And if I wanted anyone to pray for me and with me, it would definitely be one of them. They would be on the list, no doubt. And so I just think that prayer is so powerful. It was mentioned, bullying was mentioned earlier, and these teachers get to see what's going on. Some may act like they don't see what's going on, but teachers know what's going on in their schools, and so it's the power of prayer is just unimaginable. And if I go to one of my teachers and she knows the situation that's going on, I just feel like she could relate, or he or she could relate to me and pray with me, because they know the specific needs. The easiest way to describe the whole thing is it's a permission slip to pray. That's the 4-word definition. And I believe that is all I have for you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Jacob. Senator Walsworth, a question?
Jacob, is that right?
Yes, sir.
When the permission slip, it just says teachers, but you could easily be a principal, assistant principal, it doesn't necessarily have to be teachers, correct? I mean, I think that's what the law says.
In the prayer consent form we have listed, it says the listed teachers and/or faculty members.
Our staff.
Yes, sir, faculty
I
members
think we
or
could
staff.
put staff in there too. Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank
And
you.
number 2, I don't mind giving you that baton at all. Y'all are all awesome, and I hope your
Yes, sir.
parents are very. You ought to be proud of them, parents. We're always impressed when the students come and testify. So thank y'all all for coming in that lonely. I don't know what time you left, but I would think it was probably around 4 or 5 o'clock this morning. So thank y'all for staying awake. Thank you.
Thank
Yes, sir.
you.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time, I move favorable as amended.
Members, we have one card in opposition who does not wish to speak, Eva Kemp with the Democrats for Education Reform. The board is clear. Senator Gaddy to close on Senate Bill 512 as amended.
I really do. I get to represent some great people, and it's when these tough things happen back home, and you get to meet the folks that are struggling with it, and it's really neat. Alan Engelhorn was a teacher in 1956, and he had a student named Ellery Shemp, and every Friday he would sit down as English student, and he would say, I want you to write me a critical essay, critical thinking about something big you want to change in your world. And that student-teacher relationship was so strong that little Ellery, 15 years old, 1956, when it was time to pray in his school and pull out his Bible, he pulled out a different book, the Koran, and it was time to say the Lord's Prayer. He sat down in class, and he stood up and he said, I object to this religious activity. It is because of that one child, that one teacher. That's the reason we've had all these U.S. Supreme Court cases on school prayer. So the student-teacher relationship is formative. You see that? That student, that teacher met, wrote papers based on Thoreau's books, and they wrote papers together, and that teacher indoctrinated that child and said, prayer's bad. You need to stand up and take a huge stand against it. Isn't it funny that 60 years later we're trying to do we're trying to do 180, the opposite, and we're encouraging children to stand up and do what they need to do. So I appreciate y'all's time today. I appreciate everyone that traveled from back home. I told them we'd be brief today. I think that's something that we'll have to make up for with some pizza or ice cream. But thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for your time.
Thank you, Senator Gaddy. The board is clear. Senator Walsworth has moved favorable on Senate Bill 512 as amended. Is there any objection? I object. Senator Appel objects. Senator Walsworth has moved favorable on Senate Bill 512 as amended, and Senator Appel objects. Ms. Richard, will you call a roll?
Senator Milkovich?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Appel? No. Senator Boudreaux?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Mizell?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Walsworth?
Yes.
Yes. Senator Wyatt?
Yes.
Yes. 5 yeas, 1 nay.
Thank you. And Senate Bill 512 as amended will be reported favorably. Thank you for your long trip. And, I apologize for having to made you wait.
Senate Bill 512 by Senator Gaddy. It is enactment Title 17 relative to student-initiated prayer.
Senator Gaddy.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Senate. This bill simply provides that we can have teachers involved in student-led prayer. In some of our parishes, the current handbook rule says a teacher may not bow their head, kneel, or in any way show any reverence to God during prayer, or they could face criticism. This bill is special because what the bill says is that if 100% of the children in attendance at that group, if their parents sign a permission slip that the teacher can pray with them, and only if it's 100%, then they can move forward and have prayer with their teacher.
All right, sir. Any questions of Senator Gaddy? Any further discussion? He moves final passage. Machines open, those in favor, vote yes, pull no. Vote your machines, please. Vote your machines. Senator Long, no. I mean, yes. You through voting? Senator Martini, yes. Close them up, please. 29 yeas, no nays, bill final passage. Reconsider vote, no objection.
Senator Gotti, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and members of this committee. This bill emanates out of 2 lawsuits that were filed in my district, one in Bossier Parish and one in Webster Parish. The students sitting with me and many of their peers were praying so much at school, and their coaches and their principals were praying with them so much that they received a citation from the federal court to stop, and in form of a lawsuit. What that resulted in, as many of you know, y'all are very familiar with this issue. Immediately, the school board had to meet, and they adopted some type of handbook reform. And I just want to read to you the current draft of the handbook that was voted on in 2 of the 4 parishes I represent. It says, school employees shall not participate in any way in a prayer with students during or in conjunction with instructional periods or any school event. School officials, which means teachers, coaches, principals, shall not offer a prayer, recite a prayer alongside or with students, bow their heads, kneel, join hands, or otherwise posture in any manner that is likely to be perceived as an endorsement of the prayer. This creates huge problems for our coaches and our teachers, especially those that volunteer their time for FCA or pro-life groups that are on campus, because they are basically very worried and upset that they will get in trouble, because y'all know when we put things in the handbook and you violate the things in a handbook, it leads to discipline. Since this has been put in place, which happened after the Senate Education Committee passed this out of committee, this conversation I'm going to tell you about happened after we passed this out unanimously on a Bagneris Thursday with 17 co-authors. Since then, coaches and teachers have heard about the bill that really came from the students. And they have said, I hope this will help us, because the other day I accidentally bowed my head. And I'm worried I might get turned in for that. And that may seem kind of facetious to us, but I'll tell you, back home in these two parishes, it's the buckle of the Bible Belt, as my friend Mike Johnson calls it. It is the buckle of the Bible Belt, and that is what it is. And so these coaches and teachers are very worried. And so what came from this bill, and talking with a group of students from my area, my wife, the psychologist, says I relate really good to students. That's my age group that I can participate in really well. But they said, Senator Gaddy, is there a way we can fix this? And a few of us put our heads together and said, y'all really lost all your rights as teachers. You really can't bow your head. It can't get any worse than that. If you can't kneel down because somebody's grandma just died on the football team, if you can't say, hey, team captain, won't you lead us in prayer? You can't even say, hey, lead us in prayer. And somebody said, well, Ryan, why are you so upset with student-led prayer? And I said, would you put your child on a 7-year-old student-led t-ball team? Of course you wouldn't. You'd want 5 or 6 coaches out there to help those kids know what they were doing. And in Bossier, we have a lot of teachers who go to the same church as all the students in their class. Just like down south, we have people that go to Mass on Sunday. Everybody in the school goes to the same Mass on the same Sunday. But here's the thing, between Monday and Friday, they're under a gag order. So with my minute and a half I have left, I'll just tell you this. What this bill does is it's a paradigm shift. The Supreme Court has said since Ellery Schimpf said he didn't want to pray at school anymore in 1956, the Supreme Court has been consistent with one concept. The parent holds the right to determine who prays with their child. And many times these cases have started, in this case in Bossier and the case in Webster, happened because the school board or the principal from the top down was forcing prayer on the community, and that's wrong. So when we looked at it, we kind of turned it upside down. We said, what if the parent sends in a permission slip and says, Coach, look, I'm waiving my rights to the First Amendment. Go ahead and pray with my kid. I mean, they're being bullied. They're under stress. They're under anxiety. You have them longer than I do, Coach. We want you to know that you can pray with them, and we're not going to sue you over it. And as I traveled through my district the last years, I visited every school in my district, and this wasn't an issue because the teachers would say, oh, yeah, that's little Johnny. He has a cutting problem, and we're working on it with a counselor, and we've talked to his mama. We pray for him every day. We pray with him, and he's getting better. Hey, this is Jenny. She's getting bullied because of her weight and her grades, and we pray with her every day, and we want to make sure she's good. Well, those same teachers have called me back and said, hey, we can't kneel. We can't even ask the other students to pray for little Johnny anymore. This is a big deal. So the constitutional concept is very simple. We allow people to waive their 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment rights with Miranda. If you've watched Matlock or Y50, you're familiar with this in-depth constitutional analysis that happens. If you sign a card, you can be put in jail for incriminating yourself. The parent's right that the courts have said they have under the First Amendment to not hear prayer from any coach. I think the courts assume that we don't want to hear prayer over our kids from our coaches that we trust. So this bill allows for a permission slip. It allows the parent to hold their right and say, look, and I've told my coaches that coach my daughters in volleyball and basketball, I've said, look, I do not mind you praying with my daughter. If you need me to put that in writing, that's fine. They lost their sister last year. They're in high school. This is very, very tough on them. Please pray with them. And many have said, if you hadn't given me this, I would have felt uncomfortable bowing my head, kneeling down, or grabbing your daughter's hand and just praying with them. So that's what the bill does, and I appreciate your time.
All right, thank you, Senator Gaddy. Representative Simon, do you want to ask your question now, or you want to wait for the other two at the table to give their testimony? We have a white card and some green cards. Okay. It's not the appropriate time yet, but we'll make a note of that.
Into that.
Thank you. All right, Representative Edmonds, did you want to ask your question now, or you want to let them? Okay. All right, so we have Jacob Rhymes with Protect Prayer and Katie Walker with Protect Prayer. I assume that's who's at the table here. So, Ms. Walker, you want to go first?
Sure. My name is Katie Walker, and I'm a senior at Houghton High School. Just kind of a real situation that we're kind of in. My dad is a football coach. He coaches basketball, track, all of that kind of stuff. He's been coaching for over 20 years and could previously ask students, hey, lead us in the Lord's Prayer before we get started with our game or our practice, things like that. And since our parish has now adopted this policy, he can't be anywhere near or around whatever prayer happens. So even if a student leads it, he can't facilitate it, be around it, or even ask them to do it. Our FCA sponsors, First Priority, things like that, we can't have them pray with us, bow their heads like he said. And these are the people that we look up to, that we want to be with us and guide us in our relationship with Christ as well as our education. And like you said, these are people we go to church with. This is who we want to be mentored by, and this prayer waiver is essential to us being able to do it legally and have a piece of paper written that says, yes, I allow my child to be able to pray with you as a teacher, coach, or anything like that. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Ms. Walker. And Mr. Rhymes?
My name is Jacob Rhymes. I'm also a senior at Houghton High School. And just because you just see Houghton High School here today does not mean that the rest of the parishes are not represented, because sadly we kind of knew about this on short notice, so only us two got to come down and support and speak on it. But back home we see so many students in support of this. We spoke of the prayer waivers earlier, and in theory what it's going to do is it's going to waive that parent's right that the teacher will be able to pray with the student, which is awesome. And we've had so many students already sign these prayer waivers and get these back to us. We've seen hundreds come to our rallies, and the best thing about it all is this is what the students want. With the help of Senator Gaddy with the legal stuff, aside from that, everything has been student-led, and it's something that the students want, and the parish and everyone has gotten behind it, and it's just so encouraging. And so what this prayer waiver would do is basically, if everyone in the FCA club signs this waiver, or if everyone on the football team, that would allow the teacher or the coach or the club sponsor to be able to engage in religious expression with the student or students that are in attendance. And I think that's so important because, like it was said, we spend all day with these teachers, and we really look up to them, and we hope that they mentor us with our walk with Christ. And so I just think that it's really important myself, and I'm speaking on behalf of several other students, that we need this prayer waiver to be able to pass so we can continue.
All right, thank you, Mr. Rhymes. Y'all both did a very good job. I have kind of a wonky civil law question for you, Senator Gaddy. And are we waiving here? Isn't this the establishment clause that we would be waiving? And can you waive the establishment clause?
Well, and I think that's a really good question, because we allow folks to waive other rights within the Bill of Rights, and we don't make it complicated. If they have a knowing waiver and they know the right they have and they're waiving that right, and we see it in situations where in criminal law, in the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments, where people who are drunk or just committed murder can confess and sign a little card on like it's a 3x5 index card, and they sign it, and they've read their Miranda warning, and they can waive those rights. I think the question is, why do we have to do it this way? So that a coach with 20 kids on the soccer team and they all go to church together, why do we have to jump through this hoop so they can pray? And the answer to that question is because the handbook says you can't bow your head, kneel, you can't clasp your hands together. I was raised Catholic, and my dad instinctively makes the sign of the cross pass in the church, anytime he hears a prayer. And that's the way that I was raised. And if my dad was a coach, he could not do that, because that is a distinct traditional sign of reverence to the prayer. And so that's one of those things that. So the question is, can you waive a constitutional right? And I think the courts have said, look, the parent's right is sacrosanct. And every case that has trickled down has been the school board forcing kids whose parents don't want them to be prayed with to be prayed with. So this changes that.
I think my question is, I don't think the establishment right is a right that those parents have. I think it's a right that other people have. So I'm not sure that these are the right people to waive the establishment charge. It's just kind of, I know it's kind of a wonky question.
I think we've struggled with that. We've grappled with that a lot. We've called lawyers all over the place. Criminal lawyers seem to know more about waiving rights than any other lawyers, the goods and the bads and the uglies of that. And that is why we added the unanimous clause. It has to be unanimous. So if coach looks at the roll and there's 50 kids on the team, and only 49 have turned it in, he has to leave the room. He can't be around it. So we're tipping our hat to the power of the establishment clause, and in those situations, I think that we're tipping our hat to that. And I think that's what the courts are going to look for is, wait a minute, what if only half turned it in? What does the coach do? Well, we said clearly in the law it has to be unanimous, and I think we are tipping our hat to the strength of the establishment clause. Now the question then becomes, if all of the kids in a school in South Louisiana sign this, how can the establishment clause be violated? Well, you have to have someone that can show injury. That's the first step in the analysis of the establishment clause. For instance, in Tangipahoa Parish, a family went to the school board meeting so they could hear the prayer, so they could be injured, and then they had standing. You see, but if everyone in the classroom or everyone on the team has signed the waiver, then there's no injury. That's what waivers do. Waivers say if I'm injured, then I waive my right to sue you. And so that's why we have to use the nasty term of a waiver, because it does say that it's very and so then the next question we typically get asked is, how can a room of 10
my time is up, and so a lot of other people have questions, so I'm gonna move on to someone else's question. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Representative Edmonds.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Senator Gaddy, and students, by the way, and all of our students here. We're glad you're here. Boy, I've been up almost all night on this one. I don't think there's anybody that supports prayer in schools and have fought for religious freedom, and I don't mean this in any kind of arrogant way, but I've given my whole life to ministry, all of it, since I was 18 years old. And I have, as a pastor, decided that I would venture out into the area of religious freedom on, I can't even count the times. But this bill, and Senator, I just want to vet it a little bit.
Sure.
I think what Representative Landry's already begun. Are you a constitutional attorney?
No, sir.
So have you defended any religious liberty cases? Is that any expertise? And I don't mean this to
No.
I just want to know where we are.
Yeah, the origin of this bill came from meeting with constituents, students, teachers, looking at previous cases and talking to other attorneys who do this kind of work.
So to me, as I hear the definition of the table, one is the handbook. I would say your handbook is by the line anyway. I think there's already rights afforded that handbook is violated. I went to Alliance Defending Freedom's website last night and looked at it. Public teachers are both individual citizen age. This is on their website. They're one of the premier First Amendment rights, Christian First Amendment rights organizations in America. Teachers do receive First Amendment protections. Teachers and coaches can engage in religious activities outside of non-instructional time. For example, a teacher can form school Bible study groups, participate in prayer groups with other adults. And what I'm saying to, without going through a whole list, and time is going to be the problem on this, is that these things are afforded regardless of what that handbook has done, and I think we see some violation. But at the same time, I think this particular bill, because we're taking a government employee, every case that I could read, and I read last night Santa Fe Independent School District versus Doe. I read Fifth Circuit case Doe versus Duncanville. I read Cairnby versus Treen. Every one of them, this bill would have been in violation and would have failed every time. And so as I look at this, in fact, in the language of Mergens versus Edwards versus Aguilar, the quote, school district representatives' participation in these prayers improperly entangles it in religion and signals an unconstitutional endorsement of religion. And the problem that I have here, and want your response, is that we have worked for decades defending religious freedom, and my fear is, great fear, is not that I want every child to pray and every parent, I want all those things, I want all that, but for the work that we've done, I see that we create standing in some of these situations that will become more of a nemesis to our moving forward than what you already have. I would like to ask a couple of questions. I see Professor Getty is here, and she is a constitutional professor.
Edmonds, would you like an extension
I
of your
would like
time?
an
Your time
extension,
is
and
up.
I'd like
Okay.
her to answer a couple of questions on the constitutionality of this bill, not as it relates to the handbook, because in the bill, Professor, in number 2 of the bill, it says any school employee may attend and participate in the gathering if it occurs before the employee's workday begins or after the employee's workday ends, and then it goes on to talk about that outside of this parent and legal guardian signing a waiver, that's a whole nother set of questions. But could you speak into what my concerns are here today, of probably all of our concerns of we want to help our students, we don't want our coaches and teachers violated, but we also know that this is a long time fight, and I know you've been involved in it, and I'll yield that.
Yes, I'll introduce myself for the record. My name is Professor Michelle Getty. I'm a professor of constitutional law at Southern University for the past 26 years. I teach the law and religion course there. I've also taught at Georgetown and at American University's Washington School of Law. I helped draft and get through the legislature a few years ago our religious liberty bill that Louisiana has. It's one of the strongest in the country, and I am an allied attorney with the Alliance Defending Freedom, and have been for actually 30 years, I guess, because I was with the Rutherford Foundation before that, representing religious free exercise and homeschooling and things like that. So I do come with a good bit of experience with that. What I would just like to inform, going purely legal on everyone, the tests are simple. Representative Edmonds, you cited the Doe versus Duncan Independent School District case. That's a Fifth Circuit case. There's been a more recent Fifth Circuit case that's called Croft versus Texas, which had a good result, had to do with moments of silence. It's a 2009 case, but even in that, this would not hold up under that Fifth Circuit ruling because the distinctions were made between the two situations. I certainly would love for teachers to be able to pray with students most of the time, and it's great if you have a school or a jurisdiction of the state that has everyone that lives in it of the same religion. That might work, but we don't. We live in a very diverse society, and you've got people of all religions at our schools. And the concerns that the courts have had over time is basically kind of in reverse, the discrimination against the students that are not of the same religion. The tests that are set out, those that are lawyers on the committee would be very familiar, I'm sure, from even law school with the Lemon test, having heard the Lemon test. So it's been around since the 60s. Well, anyway, there's 3 prongs to that. They look at this law. They would look at your law, Senator Gaddy, and they would ask, does it have a secular purpose? Secular meaning non-religious. Well, there's simply no way that you can argue that this bill has a secular purpose. It's strictly a religious purpose in this bill. 2, is its primary effect advancing or inhibiting religion? Yes, it is advancing religion. There's no question about that, and I don't think Senator Gaddy would argue otherwise.
Excuse me, Professor Getty.
I had time talking to the Lemon test, or I would have brought my other notebook.
Representative Edmonds, do you want another extension of your time?
Please.
Okay.
The 3rd prong is, does it excessively entangle government with religion? Now, the Doe versus Duncan Independent School District out of the Texas area was very similar to what you're describing. It is a coach that was praying with the basketball players in the gym and on the court both. Student initiated, arguably. Well, they have a new student come to school, and that student is not a Christian, and that student felt coerced to go along with what everybody else was doing, which is the big concern by the court in religion in the schools, is that students will feel coerced to go along. So she went along, a number of weeks later, Dad goes to one of the basketball games, sees his daughter praying with the team on the floor of the basketball court. She comes home and he asks her, did you feel comfortable doing that? And she said, no, but I didn't feel like I could say no. And so ultimately, because the school wouldn't give in, there comes the lawsuit. And what happens with a lawsuit right now, and this is amending one provision, but Louisiana has some of the strongest school prayer laws that are possible on our books right now. And I can guarantee you this law passes, we will be sued. The state will be sued. And at issue will be not just this particular section of our law, but all of our laws on prayer in the school. Which are very protective right now, including this one before it's amended. It's we have pushed the envelope every time. We came back, I believe most of these were enacted in 1995, right after this decision was pending in the Fifth Circuit, and then we have one that was, I believe, enacted in 2014, if I'm not mistaken. But we've pushed the envelope where we can. This is not an area that we can push the envelope in. And I have checked. I tried to reach Senator Gaddy and speak to him about this, and Senator Milkovich has a bill, too, that's even broader than Senator Gaddy's bill. I mean, I have been in touch with other attorneys with religious legal associations. I have a letter from them. I don't have time to read the letter, I presume, but this is from Kim Colby, the director for the Center of Law and Religious Freedom in the Christian Legal Society, Nate Kellum, chief counsel for the Center for Religious Expression, Matt Staver, the founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel, Congressman Mike Johnson, who before his current position was the former senior legal counsel with the Alliance Defending Freedom. And I also have a letter from, I forgot I had this second letter here, let me see.
Are those folks against this bill? Is that
They
what you're
are,
saying? Okay.
yes, and this letter explains why they're against it.
I haven't received that letter.
Let's see, well,
You know when that letter is dated?
Yes.
Is it yesterday or?
it's April 30th.
I haven't received. I mean, that's something as a. And the wedding sing,
I'm
quoting
sorry,
the
yeah.
wedding singer. I wish they would have told me that yesterday.
Yeah, I was trying to reach you, Senator.
Well, I've got
I was
an
trying to
email, and
reach
my
you.
cell phone is limited to 80,000 people that have it. So I appreciate
This
you.
other letter is from First Liberty Institute, as the largest legal organization in the nation dedicated exclusively to protecting religious liberty for all Americans.
Let me interrupt you. Your time is up again, Representative Edmonds. Do you want another extension?
No.
Yes. Yes. No. Okay. Professor Gaddy, you can enter those into the record if you want, but we don't have time to read them out loud. So, and I encourage you to share them with Senator Gaddy as well.
That would be nice. And I would just like to respond to that because we have a response.
We have a lot of questions, so can we move on?
Well, I'll simply say
okay,
that
briefly, can you
every
respond?
case she mentioned, a parent was injured because their child's relationship was interfered with. The prayer under our bill is not implemented unless there is unanimous. That means everyone on the volleyball team. If somebody joins the volleyball team, like in Duncanville, the coach can't pray. If there is one person that holds out, prayer does not happen. So that's the difference
Okay.
in our bill and Duncanville, and it solves that problem.
Representative Lane, you could respond to that just in terms of
Very briefly.
I mean, it
It's-
is brief.
we're
problem
on
is
question and
that,
answers
I mean,
with
if the prayers
members,
were
so
taking
not
place
really
in
debate at
private
the
where no
table.
one else could observe it taking place, that could be different. But if they're going to take place in a dressing room where there are other people that could walk in and out, if they're taking place on the basketball court or the football field or whatever else it might be on the school grounds where other people could walk by or see it, if word gets out that this particular teacher is of this Christian faith and is praying with certain students, the concern is that those students then have a closer relationship or some kind of a priority because they pray with this particular teacher, and that students who don't do that, whether they're on the team or not, then might be
There's no case law on
ostracized.
third-party injury. It has to be, to have standing under the Establishment Clause, you have to have injury.
Okay.
And standing is a good
Let's
point.
move on to member questions because
Ricochet
we
prayer
don't really,
becomes a
we can't
standing
have a
issue.
debate between the two of y'all at the table without the members being involved in it. So Representative Leger for a question.
Had yourself.
Representative Leger?
Thank you. I'm just letting them exchange cell phone numbers. My first question is, are both of your names Gaddy? Is that correct?
I'm one letter away from being a Gotti, and she has a GH.
Okay.
Starter.
Well, I just found
Mine's
that
like
interesting.
ghetto, but with an I.
And I grew up in the ghetto. That's what we call it our hometown when I grew up.
So there's just a lot in common going on down there.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
that's what we're saying. So, Senator Gaddy, can I just pose this question to you? What do you understand the current law to be in the state of Louisiana as it relates to prayer in school?
Well, I think the current law is that students can do whatever they want to do, and if teachers are praying, they can pray till they get served with a federal lawsuit. And when they get served with a federal lawsuit, their attorneys, some of that are listed on that letter she just sent, will meet with the school board behind closed doors, and they will tell them, school board, you have to put this in your handbook. This specific language. Coach can't kneel, pray, make the sign of the cross, show any reverence to the prayer. And then the handbook then becomes the law for a parish that is under a federal lawsuit. That's not a law professor.
That's a practical.
That is telling you as a practitioner of how this has worked out in our hometowns.
And so the handbook, in your view, the handbook, I guess, is a school board handbook or a individual school?
Well,
or
every teacher must sign the handbook under a penalty of disciplinary action. So when they sign that handbook, many are going to have to say, I will no longer bow my head to keep my job and keep my retirement. And many of the teachers in my area are not going to sign that. Many have already violated the handbook. Many are already very upset about this happening because every kid in their class is okay with them doing this. Now, there may be somebody hears a ricochet prayer on the football team half a mile away, and maybe they have standing under the current Constitution to come in and say that a class with 100% participation in a permission slip, that offends them. But is that what we want the law to be from this body? That's the question we have to ask today. Is that the law we want to reverberate from this body?
Well, tell me if you can agree with this statement or not, because I'm just trying to get as broad of a understanding as possible. Is it correct that currently organized prayer in a public school setting, whether in the classroom or at a school-sponsored event, is considered unconstitutional?
I believe that's the current status.
There is, however, constitutionally permitted prayer that is voluntary, student-led prayer that does not interfere with the school's mission.
That's correct.
And so what you're proposing is, the way I read it anyway, is voluntary prayer that is authorized by the students in writing.
It's actually authorized by the parent. The courts have said the parent holds the right over the child.
That's what I mean. There's written evidence of a parental permission for a student to be involved in voluntary prayer, and for that voluntary prayer to also include an employee if it does not interfere with their work duties.
Excuse me, Representative Leger, your time is up. Would you like an extension
yes,
of
I
your
would.
time? Okay.
Okay, is that correct? I mean, that's what you're proposing, right?
Yes, it takes into account the Duncanville case, even all the way back to Abington versus Schimpf, where the courts have said a parent complained about their kid being made to pray. Well, our situation in our neck of the woods is different. You have a classroom of 20 kids or a football team of 50 kids. All 50 kids are upset that the coach cannot say, "Hey, Jimmy, you lead us in prayer today." I mean, that's the molecular application of this.
So what you're saying is that their freedom of expression is being infringed because they're not being authorized to participate in prayer?
Well, there's no doubt that that's the feeling the coaches and teachers have today.
And students.
Yes.
And so your bill isn't requiring anyone to participate in an activity that they're uncomfortable with, but it's authorizing an organization to unanimously concur with participation if they have parental consent to do so.
That's correct.
I assume that you're not filing this so that there will be lawsuits filed.
No, we're trying to file this so that our teachers don't get sued for praying in a room where everybody's okay with them praying.
And yet you recognize that no matter what we do in this body has the potential of of leading to lawsuits. Every bill that we pass.
Well, what I learned in
Right.
law school was that a bill's not unconstitutional till a judge tells you.
Right. And my point is there are plenty of bills that we pass that are eventually challenged. Some are upheld, some are not. In any given aspect of what we do, not just in this particular area. So, I mean, that argument to me is, I think it's very clear that this body attempts to pass laws that we believe are in the best interest of the people of the state. We certainly have an oath to uphold the Constitution and laws of the United States and of this state. However, it's also very unclear sometimes where those lines are drawn, and that's why we have the court system, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And I think these coaches and teachers deserve, with the students' idea, to push this forward. If it's
Have you seen this done in any other place, or is this a solution that you've developed with people that have met with you?
we have developed a solution with the people who are struggling with the issue right now. This is an effort to protect the coaches and teachers' rights only in the very unique situation where 100% of the children in attendance have a permission slip signed by their parent.
And you've looked at the idea that there are a number of amendments in the Bill of Rights that provide for a waiver procedure, and you've attempted to apply that here so that there can be a distinct writing about the will of the parents in this instance.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Representative Leger. Representative Simon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I just want to quote a good friend of mine, Senator Thompson, never let the Constitution get in the way of a good bill. And that was kind of where I was coming at with this kind of facetiously earlier. And I made that motion. I wanted to make it early on just to prove a point. And this is what I get frustrated with coming down here. This seems to be a very fundamental cause that we're trying to solve here. And been here long enough to know that I've seen enough constitutional fights on the floor of the House between constitutional lawyers. Never took place in one. I was never smart enough to, but I've seen this thing going back and forth, so I can see both sides of the issue. My only concern with this, and I still like your bill, I just wanted to hear the debate, and I like the debate on it. When you, and maybe Dr. Gaddy could speak on this, when you have someone sign consent and someone doesn't, does that ever put that individual person legally, does that put them in a position of being injured?
That they don't sign the consent?
Yeah, calling someone out for not.
Yes, that's exactly what all of this is about, that you would call someone out. I mean, I had a question for Senator Gaddy as to who was going to implement this request for parental permission to pray.
The students are.
So the coach, because that's what I think you're dealing with, would not be asking the students, I need you to get your parents' permission.
Not at all. In fact, the students formed a nonprofit specifically on that point so that they could be the data collectors of the waiver, and then before even presenting this to the school, if they didn't have unanimous consent from parents, then that coach would not even be approached. So that way there would not be any injury to a person who, as you said, might feel left out, because if all 30 students had come down to testify and you could hear from all of that, that would have been their heart. They don't want to leave anybody out. They want to hurt anybody. They want to injure anybody. But they have several sports teams where 100% of the kids all go to church together with a coach, and they don't feel like they should be under that gag order.
But
then we also pass a law for the entire state, and I'm just wondering, and so this is an opt-in type thing, would you say? If a school district doesn't want to do it, how do we go about that?
Well, if the school district has any say in whether or not that this happens, then I wouldn't have any opposition to that. The problem is I don't think the school board can put this waiver on their website. I don't think they can put it on their school website. I think it has to be student initiated. It has to come from the parent and from the student. But I'm sure there will be some that opt out, some that opt in, some that are very concerned. We have some districts that are very homogenous in their religions, and we have some districts that are very diverse. And so I think you would have a 0% chance of implementing this law in a diverse population. you would have a very good chance of implementing this process in a homogeneous religious situation.
Excuse me, Representative Seymour, your time is up. Would you like an extension of your time?
Can I have one extension, please?
Sure.
And I guess where we're going with that is, I don't want to step in Representative Edmonds. I follow his lead a lot of times on this, and he made some good points. And I don't want to hurt what we have going in any kind of way. And what assurances can you give me and give Representative Edmonds, anybody else in here, that we're not going to hurt or bring any harm to the movement that we have done with this law if it does pass from here?
Well, I think that when you look at this concept starting with the parent, not the school board, not the teacher, this movement is starting with students, and that there has to be unanimity. It has to be unanimous. Every child in the FCA is going to have to bring this to school with their parent. If one child in the FCA says, no, I don't want...
but there's not going to be a child collecting these at the school front gate. It's going to be going to the principal or whatever, and parents are going to get it to the...
No. It won't be from the principal to the PTA. It's going to be from the parent to this group. And I think sadly, that's how separated that we have to be in this process. As a dad, I have no problem with signing this and sending it to my daughter's volleyball coach or basketball coach. And that's where it starts.
Thank you,
Simon.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I was just going to say the bill doesn't say that, though. I mean, that's how the school that he's dealt with might have this group, and they might do it without the school being involved in any way, but the bill doesn't say that.
Well, if we said that, would you feel better about it?
No, not really, because
Okay.
let me give you an example. What if you have a Wiccan club at your school? And the Wiccan club decides, all of them with parental permission, that they're going to have a Wiccan ceremony out in the yard in the school. And so they put on their Wiccan ceremony with all of the parents in agreement for those children doing it, but it's out in front of the other students in the school. As a dad, would you be happy that your child at that public school is now going to witness some kind of a ceremony that's offering up a chicken to their god?
Well, I think that 0.00001% of the population is Wiccan. There's a better
Okay,
chance.
guys, we can't have debates between the two of you there unless a member's facilitating it and asking you both the same
But
questions.
I would have no
but-
problem.
I'm
with
not going
people
for the
expressing-
Okay.
Well, I mean, but there are
We
many
still
other.
have some
I'm going
questions.
extremes, but there are many other diverse religions. Maybe not in your particular district, but in other districts, including even the Jewish religion, the Muslim religion, the Hindu religion, and a number of other religions. And this gives those groups at schools those same rights to do that at school, on the field, in front of other students, and endorsed
Right.
by the school.
Representative Wright for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Gaddy. Thank you, Professor Gaddy. This has been very educational. Most of my questions have been answered or views expressed, but I do have one simple question. I've heard the term ricochet prayer, and I've heard a lot of prayers. What's a ricochet prayer?
There are cases percolating up because, and Professor knows more about this than I do, but the example given is not always Wiccan. If the bill is something else, this is the next extreme. The extreme is everybody on the football team to sign your waiver, Senator Gaddy, and the coach is praying with them because Johnny just lost his mama in their prayer, and a guy from the track team as he rounds the northeast corner of the track. Is that a prayer that I hear? And then he would be injured as a third party, not beneficiary, I guess in that case, but he would be injured, and then would he have standing to then go in and hire a lawyer and shut down the football team? And that's the world we live in. Lawsuits. A lot of lawsuits get filed that are dismissed, and I think that's what I call a ricochet prayer. Is the person is not in the room, they just kind of heard about it, that it might be happening in another room. And it's kind of like the parents in Tangipahoa. They heard the school board was praying before the meeting. Well, they weren't injured. The lawyer said, you're not injured until you hear it. So they went to a school board meeting for the first time, and they shut down the prayer at the school board meeting with a lawsuit. So that wasn't a ricochet prayer. They actually heard it. In the school setting, we're trying to protect that by having a unanimous consent from the parents before this is implemented. I do not think this will be implemented. The high standard that we put in the bill, it is highly unlikely you will have 100% unanimous consent anywhere in our state. But the few folks that want it, that need this, it will help them.
All right, Representative Falconer.
I'm not a constitutional lawyer, so I'm going to keep my comments strictly with the language that's being proposed. It says, starting on page 2, line 12, the parent or legal guardian of each student, and I presume that's where you get the unanimous consent requirement, in attendance at the gathering with whom the employee prays, has submitted a signed request. So this means every time a single prayer is given, your expectation is that then, prior to that single prayer, someone will have requested of the parents, I presume that's the verb request, and these parents would have filed or handed in a permission slip, for want of a better term.
Yeah, and the way the students have
for each and every prayer.
No, the way the students have talked about implementing this is their group would meet. Everybody from the Benton football team would come in and say, look, we're all okay with Coach Moore praying with us.
So beginning of the season.
Beginning of the season. Now if you have any players that jump on the team, then the coach would know, hey, I could get, and the handbook says if I bow my head, kneel, or anything while the team captain's praying, I could be fired. So the coaches are going to need this assurance that they can be in the room as the kids pray before the game or after the game. But no, it's not each prayer, it is each group.
And so for each group then, would they then also specify that it would only be a type of prayer? So it would only be a Christian prayer?
No, it is it's basically like I signed a waiver so that my daughter Catherine, or her teacher, I'm not going to mention her name, but that her teacher, specifically that teacher's name, could pray with my child at any time. One child came up with a waiver that said she didn't mind everybody in the school praying with her child. So I mean that's what.
So if you had that waiver then signed and it did not specify person's name, religion, orientation, those specifics, which I think would be clearly in violation.
Correct.
Then if you had a substitute teacher come into the room who happened to be Muslim and crossed their hands over their chest, faced Mecca, and began to lead the class in prayer, there would be no ability to object
well, no,
to that.
That wouldn't happen because the permission slip is to a specific teacher or coach.
Well, you just said they didn't have a name on it.
No, it does. I put the teacher's name on it. When my daughter passed away last year, I was okay with the specific teachers praying with my child. I was okay if they had Catholic prayers or Baptist prayers or any kind of prayers.
Muslim prayers, Jewish prayers.
Any kind. You see, I mean, that's so with this, I want to be, because that has been misconstrued also in the last 2 months. These waivers that the children have developed have the child's name and the teacher's name. Sometimes it has multiple teachers that the parent wants to give permission to. Sometimes it only has one teacher's name on it, but the teacher is who gets sued under the handbook, not the substitute. You see, if the substitute is showing any reference for prayer, they're breaking the handbook and they don't have any defense to that. Under our situation, the waiver is simply being used not to do anything to protect the teacher under the handbook. That's it.
Excuse me, Representative Falconer, your time is up. Would you like an extension of your time? Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Representative Amade for a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The discussion has been all over the place, and so I would like to ask at this time, Professor Getty, could you please outline what are our religious liberties concerning this matter before this bill?
Currently, any student can pray in school. Any student group can pray in school together. As long as it's student initiated, that all falls under the free exercise clause because they are not the state. So they are protected in prayer and doing whatever they want in that regard during the school day. A teacher has also got protections to pray on their own, to wear religious like a cross or something if they wanted to even read their Bible, although there have been cases over that that's been upheld to protect the teacher's rights. And I don't know who drafted your particular district's handbook, but a teacher can bow their head when other people are praying. And in fact, probably should, just out of respect for all religions. And that's specifically in the Doe case. by the way, that I was citing in Duncanville. They cannot, I don't know, taking a knee might take it too far. I don't know if that would be considered equal to bowing a head or not. But they can't hold hands. That was specifically said in the case, and stand in a circle and pray with the students, because that's the state. When I'm a public teacher, I teach at Southern University. Even with the criminal stuff, I have to think. I mean, I can't go through a student's backpack because I'm the state. I'm not. If I were in a private college, I could violate their privacy rights and it wouldn't be the same thing. But a teacher in a public school is the state acting, speaks for the state, represents the state. So anything the teacher does is not as an individual, during school hours, is not as an individual, but is as the state acting. And the state cannot endorse a religion and cannot, past that even, get entangled in religion, because you run into all the ifs, ands, or buts that I was maybe raised radically with Wiccan. But when you have a diverse society with a lot of different beliefs in that. Now, I would suggest, I mean, certainly before and after school, before and after the school hours start, a teacher can pray with a student. Before and after school. Just because they wear the teacher hat doesn't mean that they can't pray with a student. So in his case with your daughter and with these students back here, if they wanted to go sit with a teacher, their favorite teacher, before classes start or after classes are over, and pray and pray and pray in whatever religion or denomination that it is, they're welcome to do that. That doesn't violate the Constitution. It's only when the teacher takes on the mantra of the state that they cannot actively pray with another student.
Okay, if I could ask you a couple of quick fire yes and no questions, just to clarify my understanding of everything you just said. You're a professor at a state university.
I am.
Are the laws the same for you at a university as they are at an elementary school?
In this particular area, yes, but in in the broader religion in schools area, which include, Christmas scenes and things posted on the wall and that, the courts are much more concerned about younger children who are much more impressionable than. I have a student sitting at the dais right behind you. They're not impressionable at all, I don't think, or very little. With younger children, they're more impressionable. They want to follow rules and order. They're worried about what their peers think about them, and that sort of even peer pressure and school pressure and teacher
Representative
pressure.
Amodei, your time is up. Would you like an extension of your time?
Important.
A brief one, please.
Okay.
So at the elementary or even high school level, there would be greater restrictions on the teacher.
There are.
Could a teacher in a K through 12 school, when she sits to eat her own lunch, may she bow her head?
She may.
Okay, you're saying yes, he's saying no. This is interesting. Can the teachers gather around the flagpole for those before school events, prayer at the pole?
If it's before school.
Okay. And so we're talking about when the teacher is on the clock or on duty, that's when the restrictions apply.
Correct.
And yet the restrictions also apply at graduation ceremonies and football games.
Yes, and there have been some exceptions at graduation ceremonies because they're a once-in-a-lifetime event, but those exceptions are for the students that are doing the speeches at the end and not for the teachers. But
okay. Thank you for the clarification. That's all,
All right. Thank you, Representative Amodei. Representative Hall for personal privilege.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members and audience, I'd like to recognize a special group. We have from the Alexandria area, the women, Democratic women of Alexandria, Pineville, and Rapides Parish. Would you please stand and recognize our members there?
Welcome to House Education and welcome to the Capitol.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Hall.
Representative Edmonds has
All
some
right.
copies.
Okay. I thought I saw somebody's button push, but now the board is clear. We have a few more cards in support. Carolyn Rhymes with Protect Prayer in support but not wishing to speak. Stacy Walker with Protect Prayer in support but not wishing to speak. And Rhea Hope Spinks with Protect Prayer in support, not wishing to speak. There are no cards in opposition. Senator Representative Smith, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I apologize for coming late, Senator Gaddy, but this gives an opportunity for a religious freedom for students, no matter what religion they are, to actually have their prayer, even though they're protected already under student-led prayer. But then it also allows them to encourage, or not encourage, but ask a teacher if they wanted to join via a waiver, is what I'm hearing. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So any religion would have the opportunity to do that, which is what freedom of religion is. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
All right. I appreciate that. And I'd like to move favorable on the bill.
Okay, thank you, Representative Smith. All right, members, the board is clear now. Senator Gowdy, you may close on your bill.
You know, we had a great discussion today. This is what America's all about. It's iron sharpening iron. That's what the Bible says. And you know, when the coaches called me initially when these lawsuits were filed, I read the lawsuit from Webster Parish, and in paragraph 81, they were written up because some local pastor came and talked on Veterans Day with veterans from all of our wars that are recently happening. And that nasty pastor talked about Acts chapter 7 and how these men are like Stephen. They stood up for what was right and they paid the ultimate price. And they went on about this nasty pastor who did that, and that dude was me. And I thought that was the nicest thing I've heard all year. Somebody called this lawyer and a politician a pastor. You know, it's really hard to be under this gag order where I come from. Lakeside High School said the Lord's Prayer every day since its existence until about a month ago. Teachers and people in the buckle of the Bible Belt, they pray with their students a lot. And because of Barksdale Air Force Base, we have a huge influence of people from all over the world and all backgrounds. And our society up there is known from welcoming those people and bringing them in and honoring their religion. In fact, my daughter's best friends are of diverse religious backgrounds, and they talk about how much they love our area because we don't just, we wear our religion on our sleeve. We try to help others and live it out. There's been a lot of concerns brought up about this bill, and there's a lot of confusion. But it's very simple, and Representative Smith asked the right questions, and she understands it, that there's no reason for a teacher or a coach to be in a classroom worried about being fired when every child in that classroom, we're not talking about a classroom with a Wiccan and a Muslim and a Baptist and a Catholic, we're talking about kids that all go to church together. They just happen to go to a public school. The parents want the choice. The parents want the power in the public school system to determine who pours into their child. This simply takes into account all of the Supreme Court cases. Those cases have one thing in common. One parent of a child says, I don't like you praying with my kid, I'm going to fight it. This bill fixes that because the coach, the teacher will know now, based on your handbook and based on this law, you cannot pray with your team if one person holds out. And then what it really does in the Christian faith is it lets the coach kind of give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to give to God what is God's. That coach needs to know this because the coaches I've talked to, this is one of the heaviest weights they're carrying right now because they provide for these men on their football team who are typically from single mom families, you know, and they provide for them, they nurture them, they pray for them, they take care of them, and this has devastated them because they can't do it. So I just say give them a little bit of hope in this situation and allow this bill to pass through and allow the parents to have the final choice in the religious upbringing of their children. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Senator Gowdy. Representative Smith has moved that we report Senate Bill 512 favorably. Is there any objection? Representative Edmonds, you have your button pressed. Are you objecting? Okay.
There's not one major Christian defense that I can find anyone that does not believe that this puts us in great perils for all the religious freedom that we've experienced and have worked so solidly on. And I'm as torn and as downtrodden as I can be on an issue as this, because I'm as for what you're trying to do, but I really believe this brings more damage than good. And I hate to even take the front on the microphone, but I mean, this is my life, and I have to oppose this. And I don't know what else to say. It's a heartbreaking issue for me personally.
All right, members, Representative Smith has moved that we report Senate Bill 512 favorably. Representative Edmonds opposes the motion. Madam Secretary, will you call the roll, please? A yes vote is a vote to report the bill favorably. A no vote is to not report the bill favorably.
Representative Hall? Yes. Votes yes. Representative Amade? No. Representative Bowie? Yes. Yes. Representative Brass? Yes. Representative Carter? Yes. Representative Edmonds? No. Representative Emerson? Yes. Representative Falconer? No. Representative Hilferty? Yes. Representative Leger? Yes. Representative Simon? Yes. Representative Smith? Yes. Representative Thomas? Yes. Representative Wright? No. Passes 10-4.
The motion passes 10-4, and we will report Senate Bill 512 favorably. Thank you, Senator
Thank
Gaddy.
you, Madam
Thank
Chairman,
you.
and I appreciate y'all's time today.
Senate Bill 512, Senator Gaddy, relative to student-initiated prayer, providing to the school employee participation in student-initiated prayer.
Representative Shadowin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the People's House, Senator Gaddy has asked me to present to you a bill, Senate Bill 512, which was filed in response to two main events in northwest Louisiana, specifically the 26th Judicial District, Webster and Bossier. They had been sued because teachers were praying in schools. Secondly, as a result of these prayers, the school boards adopted handbook language that was quite restrictive on our teachers and coaches, and the handbook language is as follows. School employees shall not participate in any way in a prayer with students during or in conjunction with instructional periods or any school event. School officials shall not offer a prayer, recite a prayer alongside or with students, bow their heads, kneel, join hands, or otherwise posture in a manner that is likely to be perceived as an endorsement of the prayer. Senator Gaddy filed this. I have now received this much information on whether or not it's constitutional, whether or not it's advisable, and whether or not we should go forward with it. I was asked to present the bill, and that's what I'm doing. And I can tell you now, as far as prayer in schools, as long as there are geometry and algebra tests in schools, there will be prayer in schools. All right? We cannot stop individual prayer in school. Now, your question is whether or not we're going to support Senate Bill 512. I'm not going to get into a constitutional debate. I don't plan on taking any questions. If you've got something you feel strongly about, push your floor button and come down here. And thank you very much.
Was that your closing? There are no questions, but you got a few people for the floor. You excited some folks. We do have an amendment. Let's do the amendment before we get to the questions.
Representative Edmonds has Amendment 4385.
Representative Edmonds on your amendment.
Well, if we had some offering plates, I'd run them around right now and we'd take up an offering. How about that? Thanks. We heard this bill in House Education, and I want to read in the amendment, and then I'd be glad to give a little description. The amendment reads, if a school employee present to supervise the gathering chooses, he or she may quietly bow his or her head during a student-led, student-initiated prayer, so the employee may treat the student's religious beliefs and practices with deference and respect. When this particular bill came into House Education, and outside of my colleagues here in motion, I had to object, and as I've been here now 3 years, is the most difficult thing that I've had to do as a legislator. And the reason is because this particular bill, I believe, and I know that Representative Shadowin said he didn't want to get into a constitutional debate, neither do I. But I don't think that I could stand or sit and not bring to this body what I would believe that would bring great stress to what we have fought for over the past 3 decades for religious liberty for our students and for our teachers and our parents and families. I know that many of you recognize that we've had students that have been told they couldn't carry a Bible to school, and we've had to fight those fights. And I know that we have won those fights. We've had students that have been told they could not pray in schools, and guess what? We've fought those battles, and we've won those battles. But we also know that when it comes to an employee leading, there's not only a fine line, but there's a line in the sand that's been declared by the Supreme Court for decades. And I believe that this bill puts us in violation, an immediate violation, with the United States Constitution and with the establishment of a religion, because that's exactly what it does. And so saying that today, I'm not against prayer any more than probably any of you would ever be for prayer. I hope not do you practice not only in a prayer meeting at a school, I hope you practice prayer in your own personal lives every day. I hope you're in church. I hope you're in small groups. I'm with that. I give my whole life to it. It is one of those things that as a pastor, I wouldn't want to stand before you today and how in the world could I say we don't want to have the right to pray? What I really believe is this. We've got a bad handbook in that particular parish, and it needs some work. I believe those teachers have been violated, and I'm willing to join hands and arms just like you are to do whatever it takes. But I'm also think that we have to be very careful that we don't hurt any particular freedom that has been literally blood, sweat, and tears for the past 3 decades. Some people in this nation have done a phenomenal job to make certain that our religious freedoms have been protected, and I've been one of those, just a small part. So I ask you today to join with me today. I want to vote for this bill. I'm here today not to kill it or to hurt it. I'm here to provide an amendment to it that I believe gives us every opportunity not to void our Constitution and for us to be able to vote for the bill. I'm here today to support Senator Gaddy and to vote for this bill. So I hope today that you would approve this amendment.
For a question on the amendment, Representative Gary Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Evans, you support prayer in schools.
I do.
And you are an ordained minister, like you just mentioned.
Since 1975.
What your amendment is seeking to do is to make this legislation constitutional, is my understanding.
Yes, sir. And that's my greatest fear. Yes, sir.
I think you have a good amendment.
Thank you, sir.
There are no other questions on the amendment. For the floor on the amendment, Representative Seabaugh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I know Representative Shadowin said he didn't want to get into a constitutional debate, but when you present a bill that's blatantly unconstitutional, I'm afraid it's our job to have that debate. Now, we throw the word constitutional around all the time, and as one of our favorite senators on the other side likes to say, the Constitution shouldn't get in the way of good legislation. Let me tell you why it's important in this case. What this bill would do in its present form without Representative Edmonds' amendment is it would give school districts a false sense of security in believing that they could get this consent form signed and the teacher or coach could then lead the class or the team in prayer and be protected. They can't. It is blatantly unconstitutional. What's going to happen if this bill passes without Representative Edmonds' amendment is groups like the ACLU and the Anti-Defamation League and Americans United for Separation of Church and State are going to file suit against your school districts. And they're going to say you're violating the Establishment Clause of the Constitution. And they're going to win. And the reason that's important is when they win, your school district then has to pay their legal fees and costs, which is hundreds of thousands of dollars. And there is no doubt that that they will win. I passed out a packet to you, and it is the most comprehensive thing that I have seen on this issue, because you have the pro-Christian religious liberty lawyers saying it's unconstitutional, and I gave you a letter from the Anti-Defamation League and from the Americans United for Separation of Church and State also saying it's unconstitutional. Specifically, the pro-Christian groups, the ones who defend your school districts when they get sued. I have the director for the Center of Law and Religious Freedom at the Christian Legal Society, the founder and chairman of Liberty Counsel, the chief counsel for Center for Religious Expression, and the former senior legal counsel for the Alliance Defending Freemen, Congressman Mike Johnson. We also have the deputy general counsel for First Liberty Institute. These are Christian groups who defend school boards who get sued for things like this, telling you they cannot win the lawsuit if it's brought by this bill in its current form. Also, very telling is a letter from the Anti-Defamation League, which says the last paragraph, Senate Bill 512 is unnecessary, does not respect the religious diversity of our public school students, and will, not may, will result in costly litigation to our schools. I also have a letter from the Americans United for Separation of Church and State, a group I don't agree with very often. This first paragraph, Senate Bill 512 would violate the U.S. Constitution. I agree with them. But the last paragraph, this bill encourages school employees to violate settled constitutional law that prohibits school employees from participating in prayer during the school day. If enacted, students may feel pressured to join their teachers' religious practices in order to feel welcome. Passage would certainly result in litigation, the costs of which local school boards will be forced to bear. So if you want to pass feel-good legislation that puts your school board's finances in jeopardy, vote against Representative Edmonds' amendment. Representative Edmonds' amendment, what it does, it deletes the unconstitutional portion of the bill, which is essentially the consent form. In committee, the argument was the consent form took away standing to sue because that no prayer would take place until everybody signed the consent form. The problem is the consent form itself is what makes it unconstitutional. If you, hypothetically, let's say you have 15 kids on a soccer team, 14 Christians who want the coach to lead them in prayer, one kid who's an atheist or Muslim or somebody who doesn't. He is going to be bullied. He's going to be coerced into signing the consent form. That's why the consent form itself is what makes this unconstitutional. And nobody who's an expert in this area disagrees with that statement. Nobody. And going all the way back to 1971, the United States Supreme Court, in the Lemon case, which is the one that originally outlawed prayer in schools, it gave a three-part test. And the rule is if the bill violates any one of the three, it's unconstitutional. This bill violates all three prongs of the Lemon test. First one is, does it have a religious purpose? Read Senate Bill 512 and see if you can articulate a non-religious purpose for the bill. There isn't one. In its current form, it absolutely has a religious purpose. Number two, is the primary effect the advancement of religion? Again, there's no way to read the bill and come up with any other effect other than to advance religion. And the third is, would it cause the government to become excessively entangled in religion? What we're doing is we're requiring the teacher or the coach or the principal to collect the consent forms, to hold them in the office, and to monitor when the prayers are administered. Again, that is absolutely, in every constitutional definition, that is a school endorsement of a religion. And it is a violation, and it's going to get whatever school engages in it sued. There's two other tests that are used to make the form itself problematic. Number one is, does it have a coercive effect on students? That's the example I just gave, the soccer team that wants to pray. Will they coerce that last student to sign the form? Absolutely, and the courts have, in similar situations, repeatedly never deviated and said, you can't do that. You can't coerce that person to agree to it, and you can't waive the Establishment Clause of the United States Constitution. And then the other one is, does it make it appear that the government is endorsing a religion? And the appearance is the word. It's not, is the government endorsing religion? Does it appear that the government is endorsing religion? And in this case, if the teacher or the coach is leading the team in prayer, there's no way to argue that that is not an appearance that the school itself is endorsing religion. So there's really no way to read this bill and argue that it is remotely constitutional without Representative Edmonds' amendment. What Representative Edmonds' amendment does is it tracks the language of the U.S. Supreme Court and of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal, things that they have said you can do. And it puts in there about bowing heads and things like that, which is okay. I mean, that is constitutional. Your school board, if they do get sued, they'll win under that scenario because it's something that the court has already said is allowed. So I strongly urge you to support Representative Edmonds' amendment. Let's make this bill constitutional. And once the amendment gets on, let's all vote for it because it will then be a very good bill. Right now, it is a very bad bill. With the amendment, it is a very good bill. So I urge you to join me in supporting Representative Edmonds' amendment. Thank you.
Representative Seabaugh, you have a few questions. Will you take questions? He waves. Representative Edmonds, you have the right to close on your amendment. Oh, true. Yeah, you need to object now if you're going to object. Representative Shadowin on your objection.
We have no problem with amendment number 4, which modifies paragraph A in the bill. We do have, or Senator Gaddy does have, a problem with amendment number 5. Here's the language that you will be taking out if you vote for this amendment. Notwithstanding the provisions of subsection A of this section, a school employee may, upon request of a student or students, attend and participate in a gathering or pray with students during the employee's workday, provided that, 1, the parent or legal guardian of each student in attendance at the gathering or with whom the employee prays has submitted a signed request that the employee may participate in the gathering or pray with his child. The parent gives a particular employee or teacher the permission. The parent. Attendance and participation in the gathering of prayer does not interfere with the employee's prescribed work duties. To read the Bossier-Webster handbook, a coach goes out on the field and kneels down about an injured player, and he might appear to bow his head and looks like he's praying. That would be in violation of the Bossier-Webster handbook, and that is absurd. We have this speech by Representative Seabaugh that this is patently unconstitutional. I don't know of a case. Probably they do. They're the constitutional experts. At least Representative Johnson in this chamber reminded us that he was all the time. So consequently, I don't know. I don't know of a case that had a consent form. Who says you can't waive constitutional rights? We do it all the time with the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment. All the time. So if you want to give parents the control of their children, defeat this amendment. Thank you very much.
For the floor and the amendment, Representative Jackson.
By the way, I object.
Representative Jackson for the floor.
Members, after that exciting speech, I didn't want to get up, but after receiving some calls from the pro-Christian groups who advocate and who litigate these cases, there is an issue with Louisiana passing an unconstitutional bill. So I am a strong supporter of prayer in school. I passed prayer in school bill my first couple of years here. The issue is that I was made to put that bill in a constitutional form by those groups so that there wouldn't be a challenge that negatively affected the bills that were already in law that allow children to pray in schools. So for that reason, I would not want to see what we have done in the strides that those attorneys and those advocates have made being wasted by having a Supreme Court decision that negatively impacts prayer in school. So for that reason only, and I love Senator Gaddy, I am a strong advocate. I understand what he's attempting to do, but to the extent that it would jeopardize our students' ability to pray in school, I rise into support of this amendment.
Representative Edmonds to close on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, members. The Bossier-Webster handbook is not on trial today. I am opposed to what Representative Shadowin, I'm as opposed to those actions and believe that those teachers and coaches' rights have been violated. I'm with you. But what we are doing today without this amendment is we will waive the Establishment Clause of the United States Constitution. And I don't know how in the world that we could do that, and I don't think that we will or should. Adding this language is a win-win for all involved because it will resolve the current controversy and ambiguity and still carefully adheres to the applicable court decisions that has been mentioned. This amendment brings the clarity that we need, and I hope that you'll join with me in approving this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Edmonds has offered an amendment to which Representative Shadowin has objected. When the clerk opens the machines, all those in favor of the amendment vote yes. Those opposed vote no. The clerk will open the machine. Representative Cousin, yes. Representative Jenkins, yes. Representative Dustin Miller, no. Representative Miguez, yes. Are you through voting? Representative Cromer, yes. Are you through voting? Clerk will close the machine. 68 yeas, 21 nays. The amendment is adopted. There are no questions on the bill. For the floor on the bill, Representative Reynolds.
Yeah, I mean, members, very seldom do I come down here and do this, but I feel compelled today because this whole bill idea came from my home school back in my district where I was principal. I know the kids, I know the teachers, I know the coaches. They travel down here and they went to committee, and they're very passionate about being able to pray in school. And so they got a hold of Senator Gowdy, and it was his wish and it's their wish to be able to do things in their school, be able to pray with their coaches and with their teachers, like we used to do a long time ago. I can remember, and all of you, I'm 67, most of y'all are younger than me, but I can remember when we did the pledge and the prayer every morning, and I stood right there by the speaker and prayed right alongside my kids. Of course, we can't do that anymore because of all the stuff that's going on. ACLU came in and caused a lot of problems up there. I understand what Representative Edmonds has done to make this constitutional, and I agree that we need to be within the confines of the Constitution. But I want the kids at Lakeside to know that all of you support them. So vote for this bill. Thank you.
For the floor on the bill, Representative Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to just say to this body, in the world that we live in today, I believe it's so important that we not forget whenever we go through a situation, whenever we have a problem, the first somebody we call on is God. The first somebody we pray to is God. I stand here today saying that I am in favor of this bill, which would allow our children and whoever else may choose to pray in school. I'm in favor of prayer wherever it may be, because I know that prayer changes things. But when I think about where we are right now, discussing prayer in this session and talking about what we want to do with prayer one way versus the other, I think it's a sad day in America, that we stepped out of what we came here to do, to talk about prayer that relates to a God that all of us know. But we stepped away from the business of the state of Louisiana, and we're talking about something that we have no business talking about prayer. Everyone should be able to pray. Everyone should have an opportunity to pray. There should not be no one and nothing that will stop us or our children from praying. I'm going to ask you all, if you will vote in favor of this bill, if you will vote in favor of this amendment, we shouldn't have to pray. We shouldn't have to vote, should I say. We should not have to vote to allow people to pray. It's not fair. But we're going right along with it. I'm going to ask you all, put a stop to us trying to make a decision by prayer. Let's go back to the business of the state of Louisiana and allow whomever chooses to pray, to pray. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For the floor on the bill, Representative Jackson. She waves. Representative Shadowin, you have a right to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members of the People's House. Appreciate all the comments. And now, with the amendment added, I would ask that you render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, and unto God that which is God's. And I would ask for a favorable passage of this bill. Thanks.
Representative Shadowin moves final passage of the bills. Many in favor of final passage vote yes. Those opposed vote no. The clerk will open the machine. Vote your machines, members. Representative Kusan, yes. Representative Cox, yes. Are you through voting? Representative Dustin Miller, yes. Representative Cromer, yes. Representative Glover, yes. Are you through voting? Representative Hinchkins, yes. Representative Marcel, yes. Clerk will close the machine. 99 yeas, 0 nays. The bill is finally passed. Representative Shadowin moves to reconsider the vote. Bill finally passed and lay that motion on the table. Without objection, so ordered. Request for co-authors, members. Request for co-authors. Representative Cox is a co-author. Representative Labat is a co-author. Co-authors, members. Representative Miguez. Clerk will close the machine. 65 co-authors.